Good morning, and thank you for taking part in today's session update. I'm Gary Chandler, Vice President of Government Affairs here at AWB. We are now day 62 of a 105-day session, and we just passed the key legislative deadline this last Wednesday. So we thought it would be good to take time for each of our Government Affairs staff to give a brief status report on the issues that they're tracking. As you think of questions, please type them in the dialog box, and we will answer them at the close of the brief. So I'll start with a general overview of the session and what we foresee as we approach the final day's session, April the 26th. I'll remind you, yesterday we had at our lobby lunch Republican leadership from the House and Senate, and they are very dedicated to getting out of here in 105 days. That will be April the 26th. Like I mentioned, we just passed an important deadline in the legislature that narrows the amount of bills that are under consideration. The only bills now subject to the deadline are ones that are tied to the operating budget. A little side note here, it's interesting for history buffs that are out there. This year is the first time in history of the legislature that actually the Senate passed out more bills than the House did. We're continuing to follow the budget process, and we believe the House Democrats will release their spending plan closer to the end of March. That would leave roughly a month to negotiate the final two-year budget. We do expect some taxes increases to be included in the House budget, but we're unsure which ones can pass that at this point. We're continuing to monitor many bills that will impact business and their employees, such as the governor's carbon tax plan that was heard this week. That bill alone is a $1 billion tax increase that will raise the cost of your food, your gas, and your home heating as much more. We're closely watching many bills that increase number of costly regulations. And AWB staff is actively working to pass bills that we know can spur job creation, such as the R&D tax incentives or the food processing tax incentives, streamlining project permitting. Finally, we're continuing our work in the House to pass cost-saving transportation reform bills and a revenue package. The bills passed the Senate last week, and we are now in the House for consideration. We expect the House to hold hearings on transportation bills the week of March the 23rd. Many lawmakers and AWB believe a compromise can and will be reached on a funding package that meets the statewide needs. And with that, I want to introduce Amber Carter, who will talk about budget issues.
Well, thanks, Gary. So, as Gary mentioned, this is the time that the budget really kicks into high gear. Negotiators are working to unveil the House budget, which we expect in the coming weeks. But there are still several measures unrelated to the budget that are moving that I want you to be aware of. The first is that of tax increases and tax incentives. A number of expiring tax incentives are being considered by lawmakers and have been adopted in the governor's budget. These include food processors, dairy, high-tech R&D, and many others. The extension of these tax incentives in the governor's budget have been tied to tax increases. So that story has yet to be told completely. In the House, these same tax incentives are being tied to accountability measures that have the potential of destroying taxpayer confidentiality, increasing regulatory burdens for many small businesses, and imposing confusing and inconsistent reporting requirements on our employer community. Next up that I want you to be aware of is Senate Bill 5449. This is a bill that would reform our tax appeals process. Right now, we use the Board of Tax Appeals, which is considered to be less fair, less independent than an independent tribunal that a court of appeals would call for under Senate Bill 5449. Not only is the business community supportive of this change, but the Washington State Bar Association has come out and said that Senate Bill 5449 will improve fairness, promote due process, and align our system with the American Bar Association model recommendations on an administrative tribunal. Not a very sexy issue when it comes right down to it on tax appeals. So I'd really ask that at this point, when lawmakers are considering their budget discussions, they really need to hear from you on whether or not tax increases can be absorbed by your companies. We're asking lawmakers to live within their means, and we'd ask that you also call lawmakers and encourage their balancing the budget within existing resources, the $3.2 billion that have come in recent forecasts.
Thank you, Amber. Now we'll have Amy. I might mention, as Amber is switching here, is that we did see a bill this year that has passed out of the Senate that will also put metrics on new state programs that go forward so that they have a 10-year life expectancy also, and then that has to go through a process to see if that program met what the legislature felt it should. So we're starting to see them think about put the same type of metrics on new government programs that they put on the business community on tax incentives. So Amy is going to share with us education workforce. Amy is the newest one on our staff this year.
Thanks, Gary. Of course, the main issue in education is funding, and until we see budgets, we will not know what the legislature has decided to address to meet the McCleary requirements. We'll be actively working this to ensure that the programs being funded are those that not only meet the McCleary requirements, but meet the needs of our state schools and students. The other issue is Initiative 1351, the class size initiative, that's estimated to cost taxpayers over $6 billion. The legislature could, by simple majority, send the initiative back to the people for a vote with a suggested funding mechanism attached, or they could amend it by a 2/3 vote. I encourage you to contact your legislator to let them know your position on this as they make that important decision. So a few bills that we have been working on that have passed the House and are now scheduled to be heard in the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Committee. House Bill 1813 was addressed to meet the increasing demand and filled backlog of information technology jobs and address the fact that all jobs in the future require some type of a basic knowledge of technology. So this bill requires the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction to adopt computer science learning standards for computer science education. It also provides for subject matter training in a geographic or subject shortage area. This particular aspect allows for schools to train teachers to meet the needs of the regional economy. So again, that one is scheduled in the Senate committee on March 19th. And House Bill 1495, which establishes the Student User Privacy and Education Rights, or SUPER Act. This requires school service providers to provide information about the types of student personal information they collect and how they use and share the information, and maintain a comprehensive information security program designed to protect the security, privacy, confidentiality, and integrity of that personal information. It also authorizes school service providers to collect, use, and share this information only for purposes authorized by the educational institution with the consent of the student or the student's parent or guardian. That one's being heard on March 16th. So again, I encourage you specifically on Initiative 1351 to let your legislators know exactly what your position is on that as they make that decision.
Thank you, Amy. Amy also serves with me on the Workforce Training Board, of which I'm the representative on the Workforce Board for the state, representing the business community. And we're working together as we institute the new federal legislation that came in. There's over $2 billion that is spent out there on workforce training. We want to make sure that those dollars are spent well. Thank you, Amy. Next, we'll have Brandon Housekeeper. Brandon works and has been covering for the last couple of years environment and water quality issues.
Good morning, happy Friday to everybody. I'm going to cover 3 quick issues in the environmental arena with you this morning. First, I'm going to start off on climate change. As many of you know, Governor Inslee has proposed cap and trade legislation that is moving through the House of Representatives. Yesterday, we participated with many of our members for the second time this year in a public hearing. We had 3 panels, approximately 12 members that joined us in Olympia to come and share their thoughts and views on some of the cost drivers in Governor Inslee's plan. A real part of our message that we're focusing on and delivering to legislators, as well as going around the state, meeting with editorial boards and other folks in local communities, is focusing on some of the solutions that make more sense for Washington State around innovation, transportation, energy efficiency, and highlighting some of the cost drivers from the governor's proposal. It's interesting, we did our own research on the economics of the governor's proposal. And the governor this week came out with his own economic study, and we agree that there are going to be large cost drivers from his proposal. 12 cents immediately on gasoline, 22% increase in natural gas prices, as well as a 10 to 12% increase in electricity prices. So we're doing a lot of great work with the Washington Climate Collaborative, getting out and working with our members as well as other stakeholders like labor unions, local PUDs, our utilities, to talk about those impacts. I'll briefly mention we're also working on toxics legislation, in particular House Bill 1472 and 1174. Both of those bills have elements that would give the Department of Ecology the authority to take action without going through the legislature on chemicals in commerce, or to regulate industries and mandate that they go through expensive alternative assessments. We're continuing to work with the governor's office as well as other stakeholders. We have a meeting this coming Monday morning on January 16th to continue to talk about those important issues to members. And finally, I'll just mention we've been working for several years now on the state's water quality rules that are being updated. There's currently a public comment period on the state's revised water quality standards. Many of you know them as fish consumption topic. And in working with our members, we're developing some comments that are due on March 23rd. That's a week from this coming Monday. So we remind members and industry stakeholders, if you're interested in that, please get in touch with us. And we hope that you are preparing your comments, and a reminder that you need to get those in a little over a week from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I think one of the biggest things that Brandon has been bringing to it, and we need your help as businesses out there, is business, job makers, and the environment can work together. What we need to start showing the public more is the efficiencies that businesses are doing, what we're doing to cut back on use of energy, and how we're getting more efficient. We are a very green state. We just need to let the public realize that. And our reduction of greenhouse gases are continually going down. The governor wants to speed that process up. We want a clean environment, but we also want to make sure that we continue to have jobs here in our state.
Yeah, we have over 30 pieces of legislation that were introduced that builds off of what Gary just said, of opportunities for people to reduce, continue to build off the successes that we've had. That approach is better than a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach that the governor has proposed.
Thank you, Brandon. Next, we're going to have Sherry Nelson, and Sherry covers for us healthcare and insurance. And so, welcome, Sherry.
Well, good morning. Good morning, all, and thank you so much for joining us this Friday morning. The legislative session thus far, we've sifted through 200 bills introduced in both the House and the Senate. And as a whole, the proposed bills were technical in nature. And so what they're really trying to do is make further clarifications on previously passed bills. There's just a few bills that I'm going to focus on this morning. If you have any questions, obviously, please just contact me in the future about healthcare and healthcare costs in Washington State. Senate Bill 5175, the telemedicine bill, we strongly support. This is a bill that came up last session that we also supported. It's going to provide a cost-effective way to expand access to care, especially in our rural areas where they have a limited access to specialists. In addition to that one, Senate Bill 5146 and 5147, those surround the Medicaid purchasing and the outcomes of Medicaid. Those costs obviously impact us throughout the state, and these two bills will provide additional accountability to how our state purchases Medicaid services. We're going to be asking for additional outcomes for the services, some cost containment, and some more affordability for us. In addition to that, the Robert Bree Collaborative, 5144 is the Senate bill. And the collaborative was actually established in 2011 by the Washington State Legislature, and it's provided a mechanism for the public and private healthcare stakeholders to work together to improve quality health outcomes and cost effectiveness throughout the state. And this bill will actually ensure that the meetings are public and open. That hasn't been the case necessarily in the past. And in this way, you'll have access to the meetings as well as all the additional folks. Probably our top priority is Senate Bill 5142, which is premium aggregation. And that's the process of where individuals are enrolling through the exchange health care plan. And up till now, they've paid their premiums directly to the exchange. You may have read stories about the fact that this process has been riddled with complications, including individuals paying for health care plans only to find out that their carriers did not receive the payment or the data. So, and then also recently, thousands of participants were overcharged in their bank accounts up to 3 times their monthly payment, which caused a huge complications for them and for the exchange. So Senate Bill 5152 will remove that process from the exchange. We're only one of three exchanges that actually does this process. It would put the process back where the carriers would get direct payments from the participants, which is where we think it should be. And we just want to make sure that that process actually happens. So my ask for you is to communicate with your legislator to support 5142, this legislative session. And of course, as always, please consider joining the AWB Healthcare Committee. We send out weekly reports of what's going on, and then that way you can stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry. And also, Sherry worked with us as we were going through at the first of the session through the port slowdown. Sherry gathered a lot of that data from you out there as our members, and we were able to help speed that process. We hope that the port slowdown, now that the bargaining is over with, we know it's still a burden to our members. And we think there is going to be some economic fallout from this because I know especially in agricultural side, they've lost a lot of customers now that they used to ship to. So unfortunately, that had happened, but Sherry worked on that very hard at the first part of the session, so we appreciate that.
And we really want to thank you for your input during that time.
So next up is we have Bob Battles. Bob is new with us also. He works our wage, labor, and workforce compensation issues. Bob?
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, everyone. We have a couple of big bills that came through the House this year that I think are important to talk about. The first one is House Bill 1355, which increases the minimum wage over a 4-year period to $12. It has passed the House, and it's now going to be in the Senate. We've heard that there will be a hearing on March 30th. We have always opposed this bill. We've opposed the current legislation the way it's going forward. It does not take into account the true cost of doing business. It fails to recognize the additional fees that you as business owners are paying, such as the health care, retirement, bonuses, paid sick leave, vacation. It also creates a system that results in what we believe is teen unemployment. Washington already has one of the highest teen unemployments. This will only cause to increase that. That's why we also supported a teen wage bill. That did not make it out of the House, but we believe that any kind of compromise on these bills must include teen wages. We also want to keep in mind that the minimum wage deals with the folks that are dealing with this on the border states, with the borders. They are dealing with a lower minimum wage in other states. The competition, this is not a level playing field. We do not support this minimum wage. We're going to ask you to be speaking with your legislators to raise your concerns on this as we move forward to try to resolve this issue in the Senate. Paid sick leave is another bill that has passed the House. That's 1356. And that would create a requirement by employers to pay safe and sick leave. It's based similar onto the Seattle system, and we've talked about that in the past. We want to make sure that that one, again, additional cost on the employers. Not everything is bad news. We have some positive bills that came through. Some of them are 5513 and 5510 on workers' compensation. In addition, we were able to see bills not make it out of the House, such as the non-compete agreements and the wage damages bills.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I know that one of the biggest bill that Bob has been spending a tremendous amount of time is the one that he first talked about, and that is minimum wage. We know that there will be an initiative on the ballot in 2016. We fear that it could either be 12, 15, or now that we saw in a newspaper article that Nick Hanauer out of Seattle is saying it should be 16 in 2016. We're working very closely with our members, you folks out there. We know that raising the minimum wage higher than where we're at today is going to be very, very difficult, but we also fear having an initiative on the ballot in 2016 that could make it worse than what we have presently today. So please keep in contact with Bob and myself on this as we continue to work this issue through the session. Thank you, Bob. Next, we'll have Mike Ennis. Mike has been working very diligent and hard for the last 4 years on transportation, and we saw success so far out of the Senate. So, Mike?
Thank you, Gary, and good morning. So we had the House of Origin cutoff on Wednesday evening. That means bills that are not out of their House of Origin, whether they originated in the Senate or the House, if they didn't come out of those chambers, then they're considered dead. The transportation package was voted out of the Senate a week prior. We will see a hearing in the House on the Senate bill on March 26th at 3:30 in the House Transportation Committee. The reform bills that also passed were scattered across 5 different committees in the House. So we'll have to take those up as they are brought up for hearings, and we'll ask our members to really try to weigh in on those reform bills because members are going to want to hear from the business community on the impact of those. Also in transportation, we had bills that survived cutoff. The commute trip reduction. There's a tax credit associated with a mandate. So the state requires businesses that have over 100 employees to create a commute trip reduction plan and hire a coordinator. In exchange for those costs, the state has created a tax credit for the businesses. That tax credit is set to expire this year. So we have a bill both in the House and the Senate that would extend the tax credit, and we hope increase the amount of money that goes into the program, because the amount of applications for the tax credit far exceeds the amount that is actually available for funding. Another bill that we're working on is in the aviation industry. If you own an aircraft, you pay annual aircraft excise taxes, very similar to car tabs that you pay on a vehicle. Those fees, or 90% of those fees, go into the general fund. They do not go to fund aviation projects. So we have bills both in the House and the Senate that would dedicate those monies that you pay in aircraft excise fees to aeronautics purposes. This is important because DOT is looking to fund additional infrastructure projects at airports across the state, and we want them to maximize their current revenues before they propose any sort of tax or fee increase. And protecting the annual aircraft fees is one way to maximize those current revenues. 2 other bills that we're working on in transportation are related to alternative fuels. We have incentive programs proposed both in the House and the Senate that would create tax incentives for companies who have large commercial fleets who want to convert their fleets over to alternative fuels. We see this as really a step in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector, much like what the governor is proposing. However, we want to do it with an incentive rather than a mandate. And we have both Representative Cliburn in the House has sponsored the legislation, and Senator King in the Senate has sponsored the legislation that we have there as well. And then on a land use issue I want to touch on real quick is vesting. Senate Bill 5921. The Senate did pass this bill, and it's now in the House, and we're working with many of our land use members on this particular piece of legislation. You might remember a case out of Kirkland where the court has ruled that common law vesting doctrine no longer exists in Washington. And if you have certain permits that used to vest under common law, they now no longer will trigger vesting. Those permit activities, as the court has stated, must be listed in statute in order for those companies to vest with those particular permit activities. So we have a bill that would try to recognize common law in statute and sort of revive the common law interpretation of vesting, so that those permit activities will allow a company to vest on certain projects. That bill did pass the Senate. We're working in the House now to work with members to educate them on what some of the problems are with the court ruling, and hopefully we can get this legislation out of the House.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Are there any questions that you have out there? If not, then first of all, we appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule today to listen on what we're doing on your behalf up in the legislature. We hope this was informative, and we hope that we've left you with some action items to assist us in facilitating business-friendly policies in the legislature. We want to hear from you, so please call us, call my office or call my staff's office. Let us know if we're headed in the right direction with you. We host webinars throughout the session. If you're interested in joining a couple upcoming webinars, we have scheduled 2 more. One is on Friday the 20th, March the 20th. We'll have Secretary of State Treasurer Jim McIntyre with us to discuss tax reform. We're getting a lot of people looking at tax reform this year. We have one House Republican member that is looking at a form of Texas taxation that will be heard today also. We also, on March the 27th, have Senator Mark Mullet Representative Chad Magendas, will join us to talk about property tax reform, levy reform that they'll be in to talk about. So please contact Connie Grand at 360-943-1600 to register for those webinars. Well, I know we've moved through a lot of topics very quickly today. So if you think of a question or have a question later, please give us a call here at AWB. Oops, we have a question.
All right, what can you tell us about House Bill 2150 to reform the business and occupation tax to promote fairness and administrative simplicity?
Well, that bill is the one that I just referred to by Representative McGowan. He is looking at that. We also have been working with him. There is a good and bad. We think it is good that the legislature is looking at our tax system. Remember the tax structure we have today with sales tax, B&O tax, and property taxes. Most taxes are hitting on the business community. If you remember in our red book, business community in the state of Washington pays 54% of all taxes, state and local taxes. We're looking at that one very closely. We will be sitting down with him. There is a hearing on it today. We have a number of questions on it. We look at that. Is it much better or much different than the B&O structure we have today? So we will be working our way in on discussing that one. Is that it? Okay, so thank you very much. Please give us a call on any other questions you have. That's what we're here is to represent you. And we really appreciate you tuning into these. We hope these are informative to you, and we appreciate you being a member of AWB. Thank you very much.